Picture yourself sprawled on a lumpy patch of grass in a medieval English graveyard. Circa 1340, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, moldy bones, and the faint whiff of a village pig who's wandered too close. The moon's casting creepy shadows, and every rustle sounds like a skeleton with a grudge. Medieval graveyards weren't exactly cozy nap spots. They were buzzing with spooky tailies, nosy villagers, and things that went bump in the night. From restless spirits to grave robbers, sleeping here was a gamble between catching G and screaming ghost. We're not here to scare you witless, that's for campfire tailies, but to chuckle at the eerie chaos, wrapped in the hum of a creaky churchyard. So fluff your imaginary cloak, ignore the distant howl of something unsettling, and let the rustle of yew trees, the flicker of a lantern, and the graveyard's grim antics lull you into a cozy, amused, if slightly nervous, snooze. We're diving into 10 reasons why a medieval graveyard was the worst place for a nap, each a peek into the spooky, smelly, and downright disruptive world of the dead. From England's foggy churchyards to France's plague-packed plots, we'll wander through their disturbances, savoring the scent of wax, the clink of shovels, and the sheer audacity of trying to sleep among the departed. These graveyards were a mix of sacred, scary, and why didn't I pick the barn? Grab a mental mug of ale, settle in, but not too close to that headstone, and let's giggle our way through history's creepiest sleep spots, each one a sleepy, snarky gem. Imagine curling up under a gnarled yew tree in a Yorkshire graveyard, 1300 CE, the air heavy with the scent of wet grass, tallow, and the faint whiff of a monk's unwashed robe. A chilly breeze carries a whisper that sounds suspiciously like "get off my grave." The air's buzzing with the creak of branches, the rustle of leaves, and the distant toll of a church bell. Medieval chronicles like those of Orderic Vitalis brim with tales of restless spirits haunting graveyards, keeping villagers awake with their spectral gripes. Let's slip into this ghostly world, letting the flicker of a lantern, the whiff of damp earth, and those eerie whispers make you chuckle as you drift toward sleep. Medieval folk, per the Gesta Regum Anglorum, believed the dead could wander, if not properly buried. Think less Casper, more cranky ancestor. A soul might linger, annoyed about unpaid debts or a botched funeral, the air thick with the drone of priests chanting to keep them quiet. You'd probably mutter, "Can't you haunt the tavern instead?" while clutching your cloak. Sleeping here meant dodging spectral tantrums, the air tense with the rustle of wind and the hope of a quiet night. Life around this was spooky. Villages buzzed with ghost stories, the air heavy with the clink of rosaries and the scent of incense. Priests, sprinkling holy water, warned of vengeful spirits, their voices stern, the air warm with the chant of prayers and the effort of calming fears. Neighbors, swapping tales, whispered about old John's ghost, the air thick with the smell of ale and the murmur of "don't sleep there." The community loved the fright, snickering over bread about ghostly moans, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when the dead won't shut up. Spirits were a nightmare, and as the yew fades, let's shift to grave robbers who made things messier. Picture yourself nestled against a crumbling headstone in a French graveyard, 1350 CE, the air thick with the scent of mud, moss, and the faint whiff of a thief's sweaty cloak. A shovel's scrape jolts you awake, followed by the grunt of someone digging for treasure. The air's buzzing with the clink of metal, the rustle of dirt, and the distant hoot of an owl. court records like those from Paris detail grave robbers plundering burials for jewels and shrouds, turning graveyards into midnight markets. Let's saunter into this thieving world, letting the flicker of a torch, the whiff of earth, and their sneaky shovels make you snicker as you sink toward slumber. Grave robbers, per medieval assizes, targeted fresh graves for rings or coins, especially after plagues left graves stuffed with goods. You'd hear a spade's thud, the air thick with the crunch of soil and the smell of decay, and mutter, "Can't you rob the rich guy's tomb instead?" Sleeping here meant risking a shovel to the shin, the air tense with the rustle of cloaks and the hope of not being mistaken for loot. Life around this was grim. Towns buzzed with tales of stolen shrouds, the air heavy with the clink of coins and the scent of wax. Watchmen patrolling churchyards grumbled about thieves, their voices gruff, the air warm with the creak of gates and the effort of catching crooks. Villagers, spotting fresh dirt, whispered about that grave's empty now, the air thick with the smell of ale and the murmur of "lock your coffin." The community loved the scandal, chuckling over mead about a thief's bad haul, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when death's a crime scene. Robbers were a menace, and as the headstone fades, let's shift to plague pits, where overcrowding kept things lively. Imagine sprawling on a grassy knoll in a London graveyard, 1348 CE, the air heavy with the scent of lime, decay, and the faint whiff of a cartman's unwashed tunic. A distant thud signals another body tossed into a mass grave, the Black Death making personal space a myth. The air's buzzing with the clank of shovels, the rustle of shrouds, and the moan of a mourner. Chronicles like those of Jean de Venette describe plague-packed graveyards as chaotic, with overflowing pits ensuring no one slept soundly. Let's dive into this crowded chaos, letting the flicker of a torch, the whiff of lime, and the grim bustle make you chuckle as you drift toward sleep. The Black Death, per archaeological finds in York, filled churchyards with mass graves, bodies stacked like firewood. You'd hear carts creaking at midnight, the air thick with the drone of prayers and the smell of death, and mutter, "Can't they bury quieter?" Sleeping here meant dodging new neighbors, the air tense with the clink of spades and the hope of avoiding the plague. Life around this was bleak. Villages buzzed with tales of overflowing graves, the air heavy with the toll of bells and the scent of incense. Priests blessing pits, warned of disease, their voices grim, the air warm with the chant of requiems and the effort of keeping souls saved. Neighbors avoiding the churchyard whispered about too many dead, the air thick with the smell of ale and the murmur of "don't sleep there." The community feared the pits, snickering nervously over bread about the crowded nap spot, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when death's too close. Pits were a nightmare, and as the knoll fades, let's shift to wandering animals who didn't respect boundaries. Picture yourself tucked under a bush in a Norfolk graveyard, 1400 CE, the air heavy with the scent of grass, earth, and the not-so-faint whiff of a cow who's decided your spot's a buffet. A loud moo jolts you awake, followed by the crunch of hooves on graves. The air's buzzing with the rustle of leaves, the clink of a bell, and the grunt of a pig rooting nearby. Church records like those from Norwich note animals wandering into graveyards, grazing and trampling with zero respect for the dead. Let's wander into this pastoral chaos, letting the flicker of a lantern, the whiff of manure, and those nosy beasts make you chuckle as you sink toward slumber. Medieval graveyards, often unfenced, were animal magnets. Cows, pigs, even dogs treated them like pastures. You'd hear a goat chewing your cloak, the air thick with the chomp of jaws and the smell of mud, and mutter, "Can't you graze somewhere else?" Sleeping here meant dodging hooves, the air tense with the rustle of grass and the hope of not being a cow's pillow. Life around this was messy. Villages buzzed with complaints about stray beasts, the air heavy with the clank of bells and the scent of dung. Farmers chasing cows cursed the lack of fences, their voices loud, the air warm with the creak of gates and the effort of herding. Neighbors, spotting hoof prints, whispered about that cow on old Tom's grave, the air thick with the smell of ale and the murmur of "Fence the yard." The community loved the absurdity, chuckling over cider about a pig's graveyard picnic, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when animals crash the dead's party. Beasts were a nuisance, and as the bush fades, let's shift to midnight masses, where prayers got loud. Imagine huddling against a tombstone in a Parisian graveyard, 1250 CE, the air heavy with the scent of incense, wax, and the faint whiff of a monk's damp sandals. A sudden chant from the church jolts you awake, monks singing for souls at midnight. The air's buzzing with the toll of bells, the rustle of robes, and the drone of Latin songs. Church records like those from Cluny note frequent midnight masses, with graveyards ringing from prayers for the dead. Let's slip into this holy racket, letting the flicker of candles, the whiff of frankincense, and those loud chants make you chuckle as you drift toward sleep. Masses for souls per medieval liturgies were loud affairs, meant to soothe the dead but not the living. You'd hear monks belting Dies Irae, the air thick with the chant of voices and the smell of wax, and mutter, "Can't you pray quieter?" Sleeping here meant dodging spiritual sing-alongs, the air tense with the clink of censers and the hope of a silent night. Life around this was devout. Towns buzzed with tales of purgatory, the air heavy with the toll of bells and the scent of incense. Monks, swinging censers, urged repentance, their voices loud, the air warm with the rustle of parchments and the effort of saving souls. Neighbors, joining prayers, whispered about those noisy monks, the air thick with the smell of ale and the murmur of "Can't sleep near the church." The community loved the piety, snickering over bread about the singing dead, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when prayers ruin your nap. Masses were a racket, and as the church fades, let's shift to body snatchers who added creepiness. Picture yourself nestled in a corner of a Scottish graveyard, 1450 CE, the air heavy with the scent of peat, decay, and the faint whiff of a thief's greasy cloak. A muffled thud signals someone digging up a body for research or ransom. The air's buzzing with the scrape of shovels, the rustle of dirt, and the distant bark of a dog. Court records like those from Edinburgh note body snatchers stealing corpses for physicians or dark rituals, making graveyards a thief's playground. Let's dive into this grim hustle, letting the flicker of a torch, the whiff of earth, and those sneaky spades make you snicker as you sink toward slumber. Body snatching, per medieval accounts, spiked when physicians needed cadavers or families paid to recover loved ones. You'd hear a shovel's crunch, the air thick with the grunt of thieves and the smell of mud, and mutter, "Can't you steal from the next graveyard?" Sleeping here meant risking a front row seat to corpse theft, the air tense with the rustle of cloaks and the hope of not being next. Life around this was creepy. Towns buzzed with tales of missing bodies, the air heavy with the clink of coins and the scent of wax. Watchmen, patrolling graves, grumbled about thieves, their voices gruff, the air warm with the creak of gates and the effort of catching crooks. Neighbors, spotting fresh dirt, whispered about old Meg's gone, the air thick with the smell of ale and the murmur of guard the graves. The community loved the scandal, chuckling over mead about a thief's grim haul, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when death's a heist. Snatchers were a terror, and as the corner fades, let's shift to wandering beggars who made camp in graves. Imagine curling up near a crumbling cross in a German graveyard 1370 CE, the air heavy with the scent of dirt, straw, and the faint whiff of a beggar's unwashed rags. A rustle signals a vagrant settling in, mistaking your spot for a free bed. The air's buzzing with the crackle of a small fire, the rustle of cloaks, and the grunt of someone muttering about the cold. Church records like those from Cologne note beggars using graveyards as shelters, turning sacred ground into a medieval hostel. Let's wander into this ragtag world, letting the flicker of a fire, the whiff of smoke, and those grumpy campers make you chuckle as you drift towards sleep. Graveyards, often near churches, were prime spots for the homeless, per chronicles. You'd hear a beggar's cough, the air thick with the rustle of rags and the smell of soot, and mutter, "Can't you camp by the river?" Sleeping here meant dodging unwanted roommates, the air tense with the clink of alms bowls and the hope of a quiet corner. Life around this was gritty. Towns buzzed with complaints about vagrants, the air heavy with the toll of bells and the scent of wax. Priests, shooing beggars, grumbled about sanctity, their voices stern, the air warm with the chant of prayers and the effort of keeping order. Neighbors, spotting campfires, whispered about those graveyard lodgers, the air thick with the smell of ale and the murmur of move them out. The community tolerated the chaos, snickering over bread about a beggar's grave view. The air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when the dead host the living. Beggars were a nuisance, and as the cross fades, let's shift to witch scares, where fear kept you awake. Imagine huddling under a tree in a Suffolk graveyard, 1400 CE, the air heavy with the scent of moss, earth, and the faint whiff of a villager's garlic-heavy stew. A sudden scream about witches sends your heart racing as neighbors swear the graveyard's cursed. The air's buzzing with the toll of a bell, the rustle of cloaks, and the murmur of burn the hex. Witch trial records like those from Bury St. Edmunds show graveyards as hubs of superstition, with tales of dark magic keeping everyone jumpy. Let's slip into this spooky panic, letting the flicker of a torch, the whiff of fear, and those wild accusations make you chuckle as you drift towards slumber. Witch scares per malleus maleficarum made graveyards prime spots for rumored curses, with bones supposedly used in spells. You'd hear whispers of, "She's hexing the dead," the air thick with the drone of prayers and the smell of wax, and mutter, "Can't you blame the cow instead?" Sleeping here meant dodging witch hunt hysteria, the air tense with the rustle of pitchforks and the hope of not being accused. Life around this was frantic. Villages buzzed with tales of curses, the air heavy with the clink of rosaries and the scent of incense. Priests blessing graves warned of Satan, their voices loud, the air warm with the chant of exorcisms and the effort of calming mobs. Neighbors, spotting shadows, whispered about that witch in the yard, the air thick with the smell of ale and the murmur of she's guilty. The community loved the panic, snickering nervously over cider about a hexed grave, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when fear rules the night. Witches were a terror, and as the tree fades, let's shift to crumbling graves, where decay was loud. Imagine sprawling on a mossy patch in an Italian graveyard, 1420 CE, the air heavy with the scent of earth, mold, and the faint whiff of a mason's sweaty tunic. A creak signals a grave slab shifting, exposing bones that seem to say, "Mind your own business." The air's buzzing with the crunch of stone, the rustle of grass, and the distant hum of a monk's prayer. Archaeological finds like those in Siena show medieval graves often collapsed, with shoddy stonework making sleep a risky affair. Let's dive into this crumbling chaos, letting the flicker of a lantern, the whiff of decay, and those restless bones make you chuckle as you sink toward slumber. Graves per church records were often reused or poorly built, with bones poking through after rains. You'd hear a slab crack, the air thick with the thud of earth and the smell of mold, and mutter, "Can't you stay buried?" Sleeping here meant dodging skeletal surprises, the air tense with the rustle of dirt and the hope of a stable spot. Life around this was messy. Towns buzzed with tales of exposed bones, the air heavy with the clink of tools and the scent of wax. Masons, patching graves, grumbled about shoddy work, their voices gruff, the air warm with the creak of stones and the effort of fixing plots. Neighbors, spotting skulls, whispered about that grave's open again, the air thick with the smell of ale and the murmur of bury them deeper. The community loved the grim humor, chuckling over mead about a skeleton's escape, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when graves fall apart. Bones were a problem, and as the patch fades, let's shift to drunken revelers who partied too close. Imagine nestled against a headstone in a Welsh graveyard, 1390 CE, the air heavy with the scent of mud, ale, and the faint whiff of a reveler's spilled tankard. A sudden shout of another round jolts you awake as drunken villagers stumble through, singing off-key. The air's buzzing with the clink of mugs, the rustle of cloaks, and the slurred chant of a bawdy song. Court records, like those from Cardiff, note graveyards as shortcuts for late-night drunks, turning sacred ground into a tipsy thoroughfare. Let's wander into this boozy chaos, letting the flicker of a torch, the whiff of ale, and those loud stumblers make you chuckle as you drift toward sleep. Graveyards near taverns were stumbling grounds for drunks per assize rolls. You'd hear a slurred ballad, the air thick with the clank of tankards and the smell of beer, and mutter, "Can't you party elsewhere?" Sleeping here meant dodging tipsy trespassers, the air tense with the rustle of grass and the hope of not being tripped over. Life around this was rowdy. Towns buzzed with tales of graveyard antics, the air heavy with the clink of coins and the scent of hops. Watchmen, chasing drunks, grumbled about noise, their voices gruff, the air warm with the creak of gates and the effort of keeping peace. Neighbors, spotting stumblers, whispered about that drunk on old Gwen's grave, the air thick with the smell of cider and the murmur of "Lock the yard." The community loved the chaos, chuckling over ale about a reveler's grave dance, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when drunks crash the dead's party. Revelers were a racket, and as the headstone fades, Let's wrap up with a final reflection, tying these disturbances together with a smirk. As the hum of the graveyard fades, the clink of shovels, the rustle of cloaks, the scent of earth and slightly sour ale, let your mind flop into the quiet, like a villager after dodging a ghost. We've wandered through the reasons a medieval graveyard was no place for a nap. From restless spirits to drunken stumblers, each a testament to the chaos of the dead's domain. Their world was a whirlwind of spooks, thieves, and cows with no manners, yet it was also a place where the living couldn't resist stirring the pot. Picture yourself now tucked into a soft bed, the air still and the madness of their time far away, their eerie antics a distant chuckle. These graveyards, grim and lively, remind us that even in history's spookest corners, life was gloriously, messily human. Let the details slip away like a torch flickering out in a foggy churchyard. The creaky bones, the muddy pits, the taste of ale and whispered hexes, they fade into the background, leaving only the peace of this moment and a lingering smirk. You've journeyed through a world where sleep was a gamble, its disturbances spooky tales and grim humor keeping its story alive. Now it's time to rest, to let go of the medieval mayhem and sink into calm. Close your eyes, if you haven't already, and let the gentle absurdity of history lull you into sleep, safe in the silliness of now.